I'm here with Gregory Kramer, PhD, who is the founder and guiding teacher of Metta programs and has been teaching insight meditation since 1980. Greg developed the practice of insight dialogue and has been teaching it since 1995, offering retreats in North America, Asia, Europe, and Australia. He has studied with a number of esteemed teachers in the Theravada tradition and is the author of 4 volumes, including Insight Dialogue, The Interpersonal Path to Freedom. So Greg, I wanted to ask you if you could just tell us a little bit about what Insight Dialogue is. Why did you develop it, and whom dialogues with whom?
I'll start out with the what. It's very, hopefully straightforward enough. It's a meditation practice that's based on a relational understanding of the human organism, of the human experience. We're relational creatures, for sure. Since evolutionarily we developed and survived because we, worked together. Without that, we would be toast. And our genetics, our neurology, it's all, built structurally to be exquisitely responsive to other humans, more so than any other stimuli. So it's not a random thing that relationships are also the source of so much suffering. So you look at that fact of suffering, and all of a sudden you find yourself at the beginning of what is Buddhism, suffering and the end of suffering. And so in a nutshell, Insight Dialogue is a meditation practice that's part of a whole life sense of the Buddhist teachings. And, not simply the sort of individual in the shell of his or her skin meditating alone in a hall. It brings together traditional individual meditation where one develops mindfulness and concentration with relational meditation where you develop that mindfulness and concentration, but with both the challenge of interpersonal contact and the gifts of it to brighten the mind and to steady the mind. So you have both more difficulty and more support. And the insights, some of them are exactly the same, some of them overlap, and some are quite not specific, but have the flavor that comes from relational practice. Like the nature of not self in relation is somewhat different than the nature of not self sitting alone in a hall. But it's still anatta. So it's relational meditation. Insight Dialogue is meditating in relationship.
May I ask, what do you dialogue about? Do you have topics that students focus on, like a series of 5 topics, or is it sort of open-ended? Is there a repeating question? Could you tell us a little bit about how the dialogues unfold?
Yeah, there's actually 3 components to Insight Dialogue, and the question of what are the topics in Insight Dialogue is answered by that, because you have, as I mentioned, the mindfulness and concentration and all those meditative qualities of the mind, and so we know for sure this is meditation practice, because otherwise it can devolve into regular conversation, a lot of identification, a lot of just proliferation, just normal stuff that keeps rebuilding the same patterns. So there's the meditative qualities, and there's the Dhamma, the Dharma. So you have the actual Buddha Dharma, the formal teachings of the Buddha, and it's really the wisdom that comes into the dialogue, and that's the topics, right? And then the relational piece is the third piece. So the relationship in this moment, like you and I right now could be investigating some feature of this human experience here and now. And that strengthens as well as challenges the meditative qualities, but it also lets us investigate the Dhamma. So if you and I are talking about impermanence, let's say, then that's a topic. But it's not just an abstract intellectual topic. It's right now. So, you might note the impermanence of what's seen, what's heard. You look at my face, you hear this voice, hear this voice, hear this voice, and it's gone. You notice the vanishing. Or you might notice internally while you're listening to me, oh, I wasn't uncomfortable before, now I'm uncomfortable. And you might speak it. And you might not. You might just let it go because doesn't seem important. Or you might see, a tree moving outside the window, or a thought that comes by of a problem you have at home. So all of a sudden, it's not, let's talk about impermanence like some sort of, let's go to the library and study impermanence, right? It's the fact of it. So the topics are really this moment of experience framed by the Dharma, right? And sometimes we introduce topics that are worked with or seen or understood through the lens of the Dharma, but wouldn't maybe have been named that way by the Buddha. So for example, this retreat I'm teaching with Gina Sharp, its title is Conflict and Freedom. And for sure, you see conflict in the Buddha's discourses. You see the conflict amongst various monks or kings and so on and all this. So you could have a topic about historical conflict or, something like that, but it quickly would be a conversation. But the way that conflict is made real is when two meditators, or three or four or whatever, are in meditation together, developing in a very methodical way, pausing into mindfulness, relaxing and receiving experience. So the mindfulness and concentration are very intentionally developed, open, the kind of the receptivity, the relational aspect. Is trusting emergence, is the flexibility and sense of impermanence, sort of the don't know mind of this moment, and listen deeply, speak the truth. So that's what we're doing. And in this moment of practice, now perhaps the seed that's dropped is think about a conflict in your life. And don't speak unless it's present for you now. Share your experience now. Right? So you're going off maybe the center of the Dhamma as such, but you're staying with the, as I said, the mindfulness and concentration and so on. But eventually, it all comes down to what? To suffering and the end of suffering. Why am I in conflict? Well, there's something, I've got some skin in the game. So craving, tanha, hunger, the second noble truth. So all of a sudden, you find yourself grounded right in the heart of the Dharma. And so in that way, there's really clear bearings. It's doesn't just devolve into a kind of aimless casual conversation or something. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people have practice it's not so strong, of course, but that's life.
Yeah. Do you find that this dialoguing in a way serves as a form of, I hate to use the word therapy, but a sort of way that students can begin to take a meditative path into daily life in a constructive way, in a way that assists them in their personal lives and relationships?
The quick answer is yes. And it needs a little unpacking because it would be very easy to see insight dialogue as a kind of one-on-one psychotherapy with the same assumptions that go with most Western psychotherapy, and it's not that. It's really a meditation practice. So in the same way that you would say a mindfulness retreat, or in my way of looking at things, a Vipassana retreat, where you're coming into a certain approach to practice and a certain wisdom tradition that goes with it that says, come on in, spend some time, quiet down, look at experience. And you do so, and it changes something in your life, right? So I think a lot of people would say, oh yeah, Vipassana has been therapeutic for me. The Buddhist meditation has been a kind of a therapy for me. Does that mean that they're personalizing it? Does that mean that they're diminishing it down to a certain Western psychological perspective? I don't think so. So with that understanding, for sure. And one of the key pieces of that is that you still have the power of meditation, but you're not, if you will, restrained to just your internal experience in silence, and then once every couple days you have an interview for 15 minutes. It's really, you meet what comes up in the mind and is spoken, and what is spoken by others. And so that which could very easily be overlooked presents itself. That which can be pretty much, the mind is pretty good at running around its scary places, its hurt places. And certainly one could do that in insight dialogue, but it's perhaps in some ways a little harder to do because you're with another person. Let's say this conflict idea, or let's say with impermanence, and you begin to touch the shakiness, the insecurity that comes with, wow, I don't really feel like me right now, and I'm scared. I don't like this feeling. Okay, so here we are in dialogue. Are you just, now that it's scary, you're going to check out into daydreaming? That might very well happen in your traditional practice. It might happen in ID too. And you don't know it, but you're off changing the subject because it got too hot for you.
What is ID?
Insight dialogue.
Okay.
Right. But you're there, and you see me go off and start talking about my vacation last year. Say, excuse me, I'm back to this impermanence, and now I'm experiencing, blah, 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 and so now I'm drawn back. Oh, whoa, I was trying to get away. And you finally touch that maybe there's, some attachment, some fear around, loss of self, something, whatever it might be, or maybe there's some grief about, maybe something very worldly, like a hurt in a relationship, or hurt in your parenting, something like that. Those things come up because they're there, So when they're met with awareness, of course, we all know that's a transformative moment, that awareness, the light that shines on what was dark. So here now, it's not just me holding this inquiry all alone on the cushion, although there's lots of silent, sitting on an insight dialogue retreat. So it's by no means exclusive. It includes the relational. Doesn't exclude the individual, right? So in this sense, the opportunity to meet this, to meet that which might otherwise not be met, is quite profound, and can be extraordinarily healing. Without that division between speaking and meditation, between relationship and meditation, because so much of our most sticky pain arises in relationship. So here it's going to be known. The tangle becomes known and can disentangle.
It seems that engaging in this practice requires that the students have a certain evolved degree of foundation in their practice, that otherwise it would be very difficult for them to sort of settle enough that they could actually do what you're describing. Could you say something about the sort of level of the students that come to you? Is it required that they have a background in the Vipassana practice, or is any type of meditation acceptable? Could you say a little bit about the level of the students and what they encounter in the program? Yeah.
Sure, yeah. Well, I've had the most junior you can imagine, first retreat, no meditation practice, all the way up to people with multiple 3-month retreats and dozens of multiple week retreats and 30 years of practice. So it's been, and monastics, plenty of monastics also. So wide spectrum. In one sense, you could say, oh, this is a great retreat for beginners because it has talking in it, right? So some of that pressure of sitting in silence is like temporarily eased. But you're right. To actually sustain some mindfulness in the face of the incredible sensitivity that we have to other people, even if we're not, asocial or scared of people in any visible way, is just very sensitive because that's how we're built. So to maintain some stability of mindfulness in the face of that is more than benefited. It's like, deeply enabled and enriched and advanced by a practice background. So some of my retreats do have requirements, like this one had, requirement of a fair bit of sitting and, retreat sitting and so on. And some retreats require more, and some have no entry requirement. My experience is that the beginning meditators can touch for them, surprising degree of settledness after, let's say, one full day. Because, think of it, here we are, we've entered into a dialogue, been trained in pause and relax and open, and right? So you have the support of a teacher, you have the support, let's say it's in dyads, in pairs, so you have the support of the other person sitting there, helps stabilize. Let's say your mind is pretty shaky generally, you're a busy guy and, drink a lot of coffee and whatever, but here's another person, at least I got something to look at, and I got something to talk about. And now the teacher says, okay, I'm inviting you to talk about the truth, the shared human experience of aging, right? One of the contemplations the Buddha said everybody should do frequently. So you have that contemplation. Aging, well, that's pretty human. I can talk about that. I'm not a Buddhist or whatever, but I'm aging. And it's kind of scary. I'm starting to get arthritis and I'm this and I'm that. And so you're off in your stories, but you're staying with aging. And now it's your turn, and you tell me, wow, really? You have that? You have that too? And it's like, gets interesting. So what's that interest? The mind stays, right? So the mind stays, and then occasionally the teacher rings a bell, drop back to silence. There's an enforced pause because you didn't really know how to pause. The teacher said pause, but you weren't pausing, right? But now, and in that pause, you're watching the mind stir with aging and stir with kind of amazement that you just told me about your like body part or something, but compassion, just built in native compassion of responsiveness to you as a human being. And so my mind is beginning to settle, and I don't even know it, right? So by the time I've done this for a day, with some silence at lunch and dinner, and some of the discipline held by these, the form, it's quite surprising what a beginner can do. And for a seasoned meditator, it's almost always a surprise for the seasoned meditator to sit their first ID retreat and see that in, literally, not exaggerating, a couple of days they're as concentrated as they might be after, say, a full 10-day retreat. By their estimates, not my putting words into their mouth, them going, I can't believe it. So like after one day, I can't believe we've been here one day. They've had some actually interesting meditative experiences that they never had, even after, let's say, 4 silent retreats or something. So that's very common. I'm not making this stuff up. It's really common, and it makes sense. That's the thing. It makes sense because this focuses the mind, and it also brightens the sati, the mindfulness, because there's another person there, you're there, you're reminded to wake up, to not wander so much while you're talking. Am I paying attention? It seems, it ties into with normal human decency, right? And interest, it ties in with interest. This is interesting. So, but then you're right. As practice goes, as retreats go on, the practice can get quite subtle, and it's good to have stability, especially for a longer ID retreat, say anything over 5 days, get to 7 days, 10 days. That's really very, very deep work, and it's not easy. And if you haven't been through the rigors of any kind of retreat, you're not going to know what you're in for. Any retreat, the body gets sore, resistance comes up, doubt comes up, self-doubt comes up. All that stuff happens, right? So I actually prefer, when I do a longer retreat, there is a pre-retreat requirement. But the reason I know that people can sit through a retreat is because they don't always either know that or they don't, somehow they get through. And it's like, usually works, but sometimes people bounce off. That's okay too.
Yeah. How about here, Gregory, being here at Garrison, is this your first retreat of this nature here at Garrison? And what is your experience in the space here? Is it a good environment for this kind of retreat?
It is the first time I've taught an Insight Dialogue retreat at Garrison. And that is an amazing meditation hall. It's, as you well know, huge and quite beautiful. I mean, when the sun comes up in the east through the windows at the back of the hall, and the glow of that light fills the hall, it's quite beautiful. And it's quiet out here. You have the occasional train going by or something, but it's quite lovely. And of course the green, nature is actually a significant part of Insight Dialogue retreats because people are really working hard. And to open in nature and to be in the emergence of nature and the calming of nature, the quiet of nature, the simplicity, no other people, just trees, no eyes looking back at you. So being in this nature is very nourishing also.
Yeah, you've picked. I actually knew John Wellwood from my early days in Boulder at Naropa Institute. He was there the first year, I think, that Naropa happened. And anyway, he went off and had a long career as a psychologist. And I know that he had originated this idea of spiritual bypassing, which seems to come up fairly frequently in conversations about as a sort of trend or perhaps obstacle or difficulty that people encounter in the spiritual journey. And when I heard about your practice, it immediately made me think about that it addresses this particular area. Could you say something about that?
Yeah. Well, spiritual bypass is a term for something that's been going on since time immemorial, which is basically taking spiritual practice as a route around one's real issues. One can do this with Christianity and its practices and beliefs, all the religions. So in Buddhist meditation, it's like you have a tool that can serve bypassing pretty much as easily as it can serve truth. And when mindfulness and concentration are not as strong as they need to be to see through its own to see through the mind's defenses and ignorance, what can happen is you still have the patina of practice, the surface of practice, but you're not really seeing the underneath of your own experience. So you can sit there and maybe you can even have some calm. And certainly you can charm yourself. There's all kinds of trance-like meditations and so on. But let's say your emotional fears, your hatreds, your, maybe some kind of trauma or a seething kind of lust or, any number of self-deceptions don't get seen because anytime the mind comes up to them, it deflects around and in fact uses practice to keep it suppressed. So right speech becomes, oh, let's not talk about it. Mm-hmm. Right concentration comes, let's focus on this instead of what's really going on. And, so it's riding over the surface of the actualities of your humanity. Mm-hmm. And that's not liberating. That the liberation is liberation from the kind of the craving and ignorance that's like behind all of that stuff. And if you keep going around it, the craving and the ignorance have a very happy home. In insight dialogue, you have, if you will, a demand that what's arising that is known by mindfulness be spoken. You have this opportunity to speak the truth, which is the truth known by mindfulness. It's not the truth out there, the objective truth. It's the subjective truth. What's true in this experience? When you speak it, in order to speak it, you have to give it form and words, and you have to put it out there. That's how I tell you about the fear that I feel when I'm, when someone's attacking my reputation, what it feels like to me, that my becoming is being attacked, and I have to tell you about that. So I have to tell myself about it, mm-hmm. right? I have to clarify it enough to say something to you. To me, it's just like a big mess. It's just pain. And I know that I'm angry at that guy. But now, something underneath is coming to be known. And it's put into this between that we're creating with attention and love and, patience. So it may get a little too hot and it's like, oh, I didn't really mean that. Or, I start telling jokes or I get concentrated and avoid it or something like that. But it's here. And you're also involved in this, let's say it's a contemplation on this craving, on this becoming, this me and I making. So you're also investigating, and I'm with you in it. Right? So now not only can you not escape, but your being with it holds me in it. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing different things that I wouldn't see because what you're seeing, you're doing the same with me, and then between us, our understanding of this urging to become is growing. I'm just taking an example, right? And so that which I wouldn't be able to see, and it would just be too painful, and I would go around, is out here. And you ask me something, or I tell you something, and also I feel perhaps you're being present to it. Now you could say, yes, it's like a therapist, but maybe we want to say instead it's like the priest or rabbi, or like the beloved meditation teacher, listening without expectation, without demand. That's the kind of listening that I can't do because I'm scared, I'm judging, and I'm pushing away, and so I can't see. But here's this container created by compassion. You don't have to try to practice compassion. You're just meeting the actuality of this experience that I'm offering. And your own. You don't lift yourself above. It's peer to peer. You're not my therapist. Absolutely not. You're a meditator. And mindfulness knows what we're talking about. There's the awareness. So it's quite different. Because anytime I start to proliferate, get lost in my fabrication about it, pause. Right? It's right here. The awareness is touched. And it's the next moment. So the subtlety of observation and perception and eventually insight can be quite something. Whereas otherwise I might bypass, I might look around. Mm-hmm. I'm able to meet what's difficult, not just invited to, but I'm given the capacity, more stability and kind of the care and mindfulness are both manifesting in you as well as me. Very strong.
Interesting, yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.